Some years back, when I was 16, I went through something that I will never forget for the rest of my life. Our family lived in New Zealand, and every summer we used to go camping. In one of the years, we picked a beach campground situated at the tip of a peninsula. While one end of the beach housed the campground, the other end included a headland with an old pa site, a terrace-fortified Māori village situated on a hill. The area was unrestrained and deserted. Most individuals slept at the camp end of the long strip of sand. My favorite activity was taking a walk alone every evening for several hours. One day I got up early in the morning and decided to go around the headland and see what was on the other side. The movement around the rocks was relatively smooth, and there were only a few places that posed a challenge. I have previously done only the first part of the walk, but this time I walked much longer than I had ever done before. At some point, I was at a rather narrow beach with rocks on both ends and no one around. The place was empty with nary a living soul in sight. I was about to set camp when it dawned on me that the tide was beginning to rise. I had to leave before it got too dark. Looking back, I crossed the sandbar and stopped at the end of the small beach before turning around to look at the ocean. The only things that I heard were the waves of the sea and the wind blowing. All of a sudden, I got a feeling that there was someone right behind me, and when I quickly turned around, there was nobody. There was a very steep bluff above me, and I could see the pavement, but the intensity of the feeling of being watched was overpowering. It became an overwhelming feeling. I was not supposed to be doing this. I stared out to sea again and turned around. The feeling escalated as if someone was right behind me. My hair stood on end and my heart pounded. Around and around I turned my head, looking if there was somebody there. At this point, I was as good as scared to death. I then quit and had to start moving backward. Walking along the small stretch of sand, I got the weirdest feeling that I have ever come across in my life. It was as if something goaded me. Not a shove, but a nudge at the base of my spine, which told me where I had to be. I was sweating and trembling and began to mutter, "I shall go, I shall go." As soon as I climbed the rocks back up and headed towards the camp, all got back to the usual. I was beginning to get angry, but the whole process was very disturbing. When I came back to our campsite, the ranger was still there, talking to my dad. My dad asked me where I had walked to, and I told him everything. I shrugged and said, "It's creepy around the headland on that little beach." The ranger looked me up and down and said, "Yeah, you're brave." The following summer, the memory of the day could not leave me alone. Nevertheless, the sensation, the fear, and the ranger's narcissistic look one day forced me to come back, and no matter how much one may hate a place, curiosity is a cure that always follows one around. Was it an apparition, or was it all just my imagination? I had to know. My nights were full of nightmares, and my days were filled with anxiety. In every novel, I retracted my steps to the little deserted shore. The sea roared, and the wind blew desperately, but the beach remained empty at all times. However, the sensation of being watched pervaded everything. It was very genuine that I was even getting nightmares, as if I was there again, sweating on the bed, pulse racing all over. I recall one particular disturbing dream that left me utterly disturbed. I was standing right on the edge of the small beach, with the sea ahead of me, and it was black and stormy that day. Instantly, the same pressure returned at the base of my spine, shoving forward. I spun around to find a man, a ghostly apparition of a man, lingering at the verge of the bluff with penetrating red eyes. I awoke as if choking, sweating, and feeling a shiver run through my body. The figure's eyes remained with me all through, even when the sun was out during the day. I needed answers. What fascination kept dragging me back to that place, even in my dream? However, I did not panic, and that is why I had to make my way back to the headland. Jazzy, my little sister, took note of my discomfort. "You're thinking about going back there?" she asked as her eyes opened wide in worry. "I just need to know what went down," I said. "I will not take long." Despite my insistence, she eventually relented. With a flashlight, a camera, and a notepad in my hands, I followed the path, which was rather familiar to me. The woods were still around the camp, and it seemed like too still, as if waiting for a signal. The air became thicker as I headed towards the headland. The scramble around the rocks had a repeated feeling. Every stage increased my fear. However, I could not stop moving forward, since my goal was to meet whatever existed out there. When I arrived at the small, deserted beach, goose pimples stood up on my skin. It was still as abandoned as before, the in-rocks forming barriers of their own. The next day, I returned to the same place, a cliff by the ocean, and tried to relive the feelings I had experienced the year before. The only things that could be heard were the sound of waves and the gusts of wind. I half expected something similar to happen, and when it did not, I continued. Was it all in my head? I thought for a moment. Nevertheless, as I continued walking along the shore, the climate started to get cooler. That familiar feeling came back, that anxious feeling in the pit of my back forcing me forward. I'm leaving, I said softly, and it echoed in the stillness of the apartment. However, its presence was not as nerve-wracking as the first time I had come across it. Less malevolent, almost guiding. I complied with this mysterious pull that guided me to a thin trail that I had not seen earlier. As an outcome, it wound up the side of the headland towards the historical site. The ride was rigorous, but the urge to proceed was insurmountable. At the top, there were the terraces of the ancient Pa giving away down below. Underneath was utterly still with the evening light of the sun. I strode around, and it felt like I was treading on history, on the people who once inhabited this place. One day I stumbled upon a large stone that was overgrown with moss in the very middle of the area. Bending down, I wiped the moss, and there were engravings which were sort of familiar, though the glyphs were unreadable to me. The wind blew harsh and cold, and I again sensed its presence. It was now more forceful. Looking back, I saw a shadow rushing towards me, with its claws swinging. Screaming, I sat up in bed and found wetness on my pillow. Although it has been a long time since this incident happened, I feel that I don't know what is real anymore. If you ask me, I still feel that I am still in the forest.